Let me be really clear. I do not hate Octopath Traveler. In fact, I love it. It's really fun. I've put almost 100 hours into it. I plan on coming out with some guides for it in the next coming weeks. That said, parts of this game really hurt me very intensely and deeply. I want to jump right into it, but before I do, I'm going to be talking about whether or not the stories intertwine. So if you don't want spoilers, and you count that as a spoiler, consider yourself warned. Okay, now that we got that over with, the stories don't intertwine. I find this really bizarre because the marketing for this game focused very heavily on the fact that it was 8 different stories, 8 different characters, and typically when a marketing team focuses on one mechanic of their game, it's not far-fetched to think that they really fleshed that mechanic out to make it interesting and innovative. For Octopath Traveler, it was neither of those. It's even weirder that the characters don't interact effectively, but more on that later. The mechanics built around items and equipment are almost non-existent. Trying to upgrade equipment for all of your characters requires a bunch of trips back and forth from the tavern to the armor and weapons shop. This is particularly annoying in locations where those two things are on totally separate sections of the town. You also can't compare equipment with other equipment. This might be an attempt to capture nostalgia of a day when JRPGs hadn't yet adopted these kinds of features, but why do that to the detriment of gameplay? Adding those features would do nothing to detract from the nostalgia factor. Lack of character interaction. And don't try to convince me that the optional banter between two characters standing on an unlit 2-spotlight stage is a worthy substitute for characters actually interacting with each other in the game world. The fact that the banter takes place in a visually separate environment from the game does a disservice to the immersion. No, this isn't Skyrim, but more than 2 characters having a conversation about the plot in the game's environment has more immersive value than an optional separate screen featuring no more than 2 characters that remind us we're playing a video game. One could argue that, like the mechanics around items, Square Enix is trying to emulate nostalgia by choosing to boil certain features of the game down to their most basic forms. But that argument wouldn't hold up, because Star Ocean's Second Story. This was a JRPG released in 1998 that boasted having close to 100 endings. This was because there were 13 characters, and each time you beat the game resulted in the culmination of certain decisions you made for each character. So you would end up getting, say, 6 to 10 endings per playthrough. Some characters ended up becoming friends and adventuring together, others got married, etc. Compared to Star Ocean, Octopath Traveler's character interaction almost seems like an afterthought. And again, it's weird that the marketing team decided the hook for this game was that it was 8 stories with 8 characters, when in fact the mechanics revolving around that feature weren't fleshed out enough. Hanit. I'm sure you know where this is going. And it's sad because she's an awesome huntress who lives in the woods and controls an army of beasts. But I've ended up disliking her because she sounds like the last person in a game of telephone for the Canterbury Tales. But it's not just that her fake old English makes me want to bathe in a tub full of Shakespeare collections. I also find it to be a really weird choice for that character in particular. It looks like the localization team's desire was to make this dialect sound really flowery and upper class, so then why would you attribute that dialect to a hunter who lives in the woods? It would still annoy me if they put it on like Cyrus because it's still fake old English, but it would make slightly more sense. Path actions. This was another feature that was heavily marketed as each character having their own unique actions that can do a variety of different things. In truth, there are about 4 different path actions if you boil them down to their end goal, and one of them in particular features a very questionable game design choice. Ulbrich and Hanit have effectively the same path action. You can challenge NPCs in order to get past them for loot or whatever it is. However, if you choose Hanit's path action, Provoke, you only have access to her Summon Beast ability during battle, and items, so you don't get to command her to simply attack with her bow or axe. All the beasts she captures have a limited number of times you can summon them, but the one beast that you can summon infinitely is Lind. And when you summon Lind, you don't get to choose between the sword or polearm based attacks that she has. This pretty much makes her path action obsolete. Why go with Hanit when you can decide for yourself which weapons you want to attack with Ulbrich? Tressa's purchase path action lets you buy rare items, and sometimes items that are otherwise unattainable, at a discount. Sometimes. It doesn't tell you how much of a discount you're getting until you actually purchase it. I don't know how to explain why that's odd. I feel like describing what her path action does already tells you what's wrong with it. Other than that though, this game's great. Really good soundtrack. If you like this video, good. I want to keep making more of them. Sure, subscribing helps, but what would help me even more is if you jump over to my Patreon page and decide, I don't need this money. I'll just give it to this guy. He's cool. He looks like he smells nice.